Hindsight can be 20/20, but it is not the way to go. The good thing about having our Creator's measuring rod is we do not need to have hindsight to know what is true. But I sometimes reflect back on my journey out of the captivity. It is amazing the depths of willful rebellion that our human minds will go to just to justify ourselves and to justify our beliefs. This is why we have to measure our thoughts and our beliefs with the measuring rod that our Creator gave us. As those of you who are listening to these videos know, we are currently in the commanded Feast of Temporary Dwellings that some in Christianity call the Feast of Tabernacles. Of course, most of them do not even know anything about this feast or at all, or they could care less about it. But there are several groups that celebrate a perversion of this feast each year by going to a pre-selected feast site to worship their false image of our Creator. One of the duos who are in the world today that call themselves our Creator's prophets and His end-time witnesses lead one of these groups. I am sure that they would say that I am the one who is teaching a perversion of this feast and that they are the ones that are doing it properly. It is a beautiful thing that we have a measuring rod so that we can know who is false and who is walking in the truth. These groups know that Israel of old was commanded to build these temporary huts each year, so what changed? Why are they going to hotels? Where did the instructions change? It is to be a statute forever throughout our generations. Leviticus 23 says, "You shall take for the first day fruit from goodly trees, and the hollows of palm trees, and the branches of thick trees, and willows of the brook, and you shall rejoice before Yahweh Elohim for 7 days. And you shall celebrate Yahweh's feast 7 days in the year, and it shall be a statute forever in your generations. You shall celebrate it in the 7th month." Who gave these organizations the authority to change this statute? I guess that they can be like the Catholics and claim that they have binding and loosening powers, therefore they can make changes like this. But let me ask you something. Would anyone whom our Creator would give binding and loosening power to actually change His statutes that are to be forever? The answer is no, because those whom He gives binding and loosening authority to delight in His Torah. They do not seek to change one word of it. They desire to be in agreement with His instructions. This is why He gives such hearts as these binding and loosening authority. This should be quite simple to understand. If you believe that bearing the name of Satan is bearing the name of disobedience and rebellion, this is the mark of his name. And the opposite of bearing Satan's name is to bear the name of our Creator, which is bearing His righteousness. And the fruit of the mark of His name is found in our obedience to His word. I started off this video saying that hindsight is 20/20 because my father was calling, because as my father was calling me to Him, He led me through a short season in one of the enemy's camps that perverts this feast by going to hotels and such. I had mentioned before that this camp was none other than the false prophet Ron Wineland's organization. I remember wondering why we were not building these huts that we were commanded to when he read these verses. I remember going to an arcade with a group of the congregants of his organization and watching a group of men and boys of different ages play what I knew to be a sick game. It was abominable. I think it was called Deal or No Deal. It had these half-dressed women come out on the screen with their emotions of joy or grief, depending if the participants answered the questions correctly or not. I felt like destroying the machine and crying out to these people, "What are you doing?" But I was still weak and in bondage myself, so I just walked away in disgust and sorrowed for them. I remember returning from this so-called feast with my wife, receiving pictures from a woman who was one of this man's so-called elders in his organization. These pictures were pictures of this elder's granddaughter walking with a barely dressed daughter of one of his senior elders on the beach at one of their feast sites. This lady that sent these pictures out with no shame, and she is one of the closest friends of these two so-called witnesses. And what about this senior elder for not teaching his daughter to have modesty and shame? This is shameful in itself. I speak of these examples today because these organizations are leading many down one of the many paths to the lake of fire. And they are hiding behind a form of keeping our Creator's commandments, including this very special Feast of Temporary Dwellings. But exposing their hypocrisy is really an easy task. And finding the truth is an easy thing to do as well if you will simply believe our Creator's instruction manual. By believing Him, you can know those who are seeking the truth or not by their fruit. They will either have rebellious fruit or obedient fruit. This is why Yeshua described what He described when He said that you can know them by their fruit. He went on to say in those verses that their fruit might even include driving out demons in His name, or prophesying, which include preaching in His name, or many other good works in His name. So they might even have a counterfeit feast in His name. Of course, they don't even know what His name represents, but that's another subject. But He says that He will tell them to depart from Him because they practiced or lived lawlessness and He never knew them. This is because the way that He and His Father live in us to know us is through His Torah. His Torah is the narrow path and it leads us to the narrow gate. It is our Creator's word that Yeshua became in the flesh, and we are to follow Him. So when someone talks about being off to celebrate the feast at some fancy hotel or some other perversion of the word, you can know that they are of their father the devil, because his word really has no place in them. Just read this verse on the screen. It's pretty simple. Is it commanded forever or not? There are many other examples, such as if they don't wear blue tassels that I use because it's so simple, that you can know if they don't, you can know that they are of their father the devil. It really is this simple. I've spoken about this in several of these videos. Are they living by every word, or are they denying some of His word by picking and choosing what to obey? I am sure that even Ron Wineland would say that we need to live by every word, so why is he not building huts and teaching his followers to do so? Why does he not obey so many of the rest of the commandments either? Why does he trust in man to heal him, etc.? We have a measuring rod given to us that all things must be measured against, at least if we're to be in the truth. And we need to measure the Spirit that is guiding us and guiding our thoughts to the same measuring rod. Is the Spirit that is guiding you into truth teaching you to live by every word of Elohim, or is it teaching you to pick and choose what to obey and how to obey? With my example of hindsight is 2020, the Spirit that was calling me out of the captivity was telling me that this perversion of the feast was all wrong. The Spirit was showing me Wineland's other errors as well. I had a choice to make with each thing that his seven spirits showed me. I could either agree with the man and what he said was true, or test the Spirit that was calling me with the way that our Creator told us to test all spirits with. He had his servant tell us that any spirit that is in agreement with the Logos of Elohim, the same Logos that Yeshua became, is of Elohim. And that any spirit that is not confessing this agreement in their flesh or how they live is of the spirit of the anti-Messiah. I chose not to believe a man, but to believe the word of Elohim. I chose to believe the Spirit that the word of Elohim backs up. Something was guiding me out of these false beliefs. I just measured against the word. It's really that simple. If the Spirit that's guiding you is not in agreement with the word, you know it's the wrong spirit. This is the choice that each of you must make, because his seven spirits have gone out into the world, but you have to hunger for them to receive them. And you have to fear, I've talked about this before, you have to fear not being in agreement with your Creator. It's the beginning of wisdom and understanding. And it's the eye salve that you need to anoint your eyes with so that you can receive his other 6 guiding spirits. And this starts with hungering for his righteousness and hungering for his kingdom. If you hunger for a hotel, this is what you will get to go a-whoring in. We are commanded to build these temporary dwellings each year and to set in them for a reason. This is just one very simple example of the adultery that these groups make with their Creator. They commit whoredom with him by not obeying him and worshiping false versions of him. Some have written me and told me that they know that they have Elohim's Spirit living in them and guiding them, but that they have no interest in the Torah, or they don't think that they need to guard it and walk in it like we are commanded to. Well, the measuring rod says that they have a different spirit guiding them. we either believe our Creator's word or not. If we rely on our own understanding, we are on a sinking ship. It is exciting that what our Creator is giving us about the goodly fruit that we are to bring into our temporary dwellings. Yesterday I spoke on how this fruit that comes from the goodly trees is symbolic of what we are to bring into our minds, because we are what the temporary dwellings represent. I also spoke on how He is tying this feast together with the two trees in the garden and with the branches of the logos of Elohim that we are to become. And Yeshua had spoken that we are to become, He is the vine and we are the branches. And of course, He was the logos of Elohim. He still is the logos of Elohim. It's what He represents. And the end result of bringing in only goodly fruit from goodly trees into our temporary dwellings will be that we will become goodly trees, or trees of righteousness, and we will not be temporary dwellings any longer. This is exciting. Did He show this to me staying in a hotel? I also discussed yesterday that the desires of our hearts are the telltale indicators of where our hearts really are at. If your heart is to play some video game at an arcade on His set-apart feast, or any other time for that matter, or watching sporting events, etc., it shows that your mind is not being molded by the goodly fruit. You're seeking after a different kind of fruit. It shows that you are eating the bread of men. Reflecting on hindsight, there were so many red flags to prove to me that this organization was false. I was just a little dull on listening because I did not understand the measuring rod yet. Why not? It was because Weiland was not teaching it. His words are to be His followers' measuring rod, not our Creator's words. It is a good thing that I chose to stop listening to His measuring rod and started listening to the one that was given to us by the source of all truth. And now how sweet it is to have our Creator's measuring rod, so that I will never need to use the 20/20 hindsight again. For many, the hindsight will be when they look back from their walk down the plank that leads towards the lake of fire because they rejected His measuring rod. This would be a bad time for hindsight. There will be weeping and gnashing of teeth, this is for sure. After a couple of days of spending time in my hut, I would not trade 1 minute of this time for a lifetime of resorts and what man tries to make his paradise to be. I will spend every minute living to come out of my temporary dwellings from here on out, so that I will not be temporary any longer. As for all of you who are still following the Winelands of the world, or any other false teachers who take you away from living by every word of our Elohim, I suggest that you jump from their sinking ships while you still can and turn to the truth that will deliver you and set you free.